It was just a few weeks ago that I was channel surfing watching TV one evening, and I came upon a documentary in honor of Remembrance Day. It highlighted an event that occurred on February the 18th of 1942. Perhaps not a well-known story, but one that took place not far from here in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, as 3 U.S. naval ships made their way to Argentia, Newfoundland. This small convoy that consisted of the USS Wilkes, a World War I destroyer, the USS Truxtun, and a huge supply ship named the Pollux, were all under radio silence and using limited navigation aids. But catastrophe happened at 0400, that's 4 in the morning, on a dark Ash Wednesday morning when the convoy sailed into an Atlantic winter storm. Though some navigational errors, and through these navigational errors occurred, and with a broken chain of communications, the unthinkable did happen. The ships were not taken out by bombs or by bullets or by a torpedo, but ended up grounding on the jagged rocks of the Burin Peninsula. Many of the sailors were dressed only in their dungarees, or we'd say blue jeans today, light shirts, some without shoes or even boots, were cast into the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. 2 of the men were able to struggle to shore, only to find themselves at the base of a 300-foot cliff. To put that in perspective, it would be like trying to look up at a 30-story building. With no equipment, only their bare hands, they began to climb the escarpment. You see, they knew at that time that somehow, some way, they had to get help for their friends. So inch by inch, they clawed their way to the top. Through God's mercy and grace, they saw a faint light in the distance and stumbled and crawled to a small cabin that was part of a mining operation in the town of St. Lawrence on the Burin Peninsula. Once the local people were made aware of the disaster, every man, woman, and child acted without hesitation to come to the aid of their brothers in need. Gathering up ropes and anything they could use to mount a rescue effort, they knew that time was of the essence as they began to pull many of the sailors to safety. They brought food to feed them. They brought hot beverages to give them something to drink and to warm them. And they dressed their wounds after coming in on the jagged rocks. They kept the fires burning to keep them warm and offered them consolation and hope as they were suffering from the shock of the disaster. These many acts of corporal sacrifice were acts of love as a community came together to offer what little they had and to offer to these poor men that had been cast into the sea. But mostly they gave them what they were. The selflessness was evident when one of the Navy signalmen from one of the ships, whose name was only recognized as Bo, stood on the rocks in his pants and in a shirt only, without proper footwear, and conveyed semaphore messages from the rocky frozen shore to the sinking ships to keep the communications open and to help give his fellow seamen hope for the sake of rescue from the disaster. Witnesses that were there that day said he would not leave his post. When he had done all that he could do, he stumbled towards a warming fire, shaking violently from the severe cold, but sadly succumbed to hypothermia. He gave everything he had. In all that day, of the 388 men of the ship's companies that would end up in the sea, Only 85 were saved. That day the Good Shepherd called his people. They heard him and answered him and followed him to do what he taught them to do, to take care of those who were in need, and that day for those that were in dire need. You see, these works, as Jesus explains, are reflections, or more precisely, measures of our love for him, our faithfulness to his commandment that we love God with all our might and our neighbors as ourselves. Blessedness comes from active compassion toward those in need. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. If we don't see those in society who are in need, or worse, if we see them and do nothing, then we become more like the goats. It becomes a sin of omission. Our faith is dead and lifeless unless it is expressed in action through works of love and compassion. St. Paul said these words, and I paraphrase them to make them easier for us to understand. He said, "Why do I do things that I know I should not do, and not do things that I know that I should?" That's worth repetition. Why do I do the things that I know I should not do, and not do the things that I know that I should? Last week, Father Eve spoke of St. Mother Teresa of Calcutta. It is reported that this small Albanian nun had personally gone out onto the streets and saved over 25,000 poor and suffering people from neglect and the indignity of a lonely death on the streets of one of the poorest cities on earth. By her action to rescue them, to bring them to the home for the destitute with dignity, and to have a clean and warm bed to go home to God. She had a short prayer that she would pray on the fingers of one hand. It was very simple but so impactful. She would hold her hand up and say, "You did it to me." The words that Jesus says in the gospel today. The Son of Man is coming in his glory. He will sit on his throne in glory. All nations will be gathered before him, and the light of Christ will shine upon all before him. And we will see the sheep and the goats. Nothing will be in the shadows. All will be revealed. So each day, be mindful and listen to the voice of the shepherd. Let us put away our differences, mend broken relationships, listen to others, offer solace, offer peace. Let us remember the example of those good people of St. Lawrence in the adjacent town of Lawn, and how they came together as a community to help all their brothers on that Ash Wednesday morning in 1942.